The most dangerous thing I ever did wasn't saying yes to a mafia boss. It was saying no. The first time I met Adrian Moretti, half the room stopped breathing when he walked in. I wish I were exaggerating. I wish I could tell you he looked ordinary, that he blended into the crowd like everyone else at the charity fundraiser hosted in downtown Manhattan that cold October evening. But some people carry power the way storms carry lightning. You feel it before you see it. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. Glasses clinked softly. Expensive perfume lingered in the air. Men in tailored suits laughed a little too loudly. Women adjusted their smiles whenever someone important passed by. And then Adrian entered. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Even from across the room, I noticed the subtle shift. Waiters stood straighter. Business executives moved aside. The city's elite suddenly looked like students waiting for a principal to enter the classroom. I was standing near a display of children's artwork from my elementary school class, pretending not to feel completely out of place. My navy blue dress came from a clearance rack. My heels hurt, and I was already counting the minutes until I could leave. "Miss Bennett," a voice asked. "Someone would like to meet you." I turned and followed the event coordinator through the crowd. The closer we got, the quieter my thoughts became. Adrian Moretti stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Tall, dark hair, gray suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. His expression was calm, unreadable, the kind of face that never revealed what it was thinking. His eyes landed on me. Not my dress, not my appearance. Me. It felt strangely unsettling. "Claire Bennett," he said. His voice was low and controlled. "I enjoyed your speech." I blinked. "You actually listened?" One corner of his mouth lifted. "I did." "Then you're probably the only one." A few people nearby looked horrified by my response. Adrian simply stared at me for a second before something unexpected happened. He laughed. A real laugh. Brief. Genuine. The room seemed shocked by it. "You're different than I expected," he said. "I get that a lot." Silence settled between us. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. Boats moved like shadows across the dark river. Adrian studied me carefully. "Would you allow me to take you to dinner sometime?" There it was. The question every woman in this room would have answered before he finished asking it. Around us, I felt people watching, waiting, expecting. But all I could think about was the stories, the rumors, the headlines, the whispers attached to his name. Money, influence, control. A man who always got what he wanted. I smiled politely. No, the word hung in the air. Simple, quiet, absolute. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For the first time all evening, Adrian Moretti looked surprised. "No," he repeated. "No," I said again. "I'm sure you're used to hearing yes. But I don't think dinner is a good idea." The rain continued tapping against the windows. Somewhere behind us, a champagne glass clinked. Adrian never looked away. Neither did I. And for reasons I wouldn't understand until much later, the moment I walked away from the most powerful man in the room was the exact moment he started thinking about me. Most people think powerful men forget rejection by morning. They are wrong. Monday arrived with cold rain and gray skies hanging over Brooklyn like a heavy blanket. By 7:30, I was standing in front of my third-grade classroom arranging construction paper pumpkins across a bulletin board while 22 children filled the room with enough energy to power Manhattan. The fundraiser already felt like a strange dream. A world of crystal chandeliers and designer suits that had nothing to do with my real life. Exactly where it belonged. At least that was what I kept telling myself. Around lunchtime, I noticed the first sign that something was different. The school principal called me into her office. She looked unusually excited. That should have been my first warning. "Claire, sit down," she said. "You are not going to believe this." I sat. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a proposal. A donation proposal. My eyes moved across the numbers once. Then twice. Then a third time because surely I had read them wrong. $500,000. I whispered. "For the school. For the library renovation program." Her smile widened. "Anonymous donor." I stared at the page. New books. New computers. Updated classrooms. Resources we had been requesting for years. Resources we could never afford. Who donated it? I asked. They wished to remain anonymous. The answer came too quickly. I already knew. By 3 o'clock, the rain had stopped. The children went home. Teachers filled the hallways discussing the donation like it was a miracle. Maybe it was. But something about it bothered me. Around 6 that evening, I left school carrying a stack of grading papers under one arm. The air smelled like wet pavement and fallen leaves. Traffic crawled through the streets. New York settling into another ordinary night. That was when I saw him. Adrian Moretti stood across the street beside a black sedan. No security crowd. No entourage. Just him. My footsteps slowed. His eyes met mine immediately, like he had been waiting. Maybe he had. You followed me? I asked when I reached the corner. No, his voice remained calm. I waited. That is somehow worse. A faint smile touched his face. I wanted to see if you would recognize me. The entire city recognizes you. You still walked away. There it was again. That strange honesty. Not anger. Not wounded pride. Curiosity. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I crossed my arms. Did you donate the money? Adrian glanced toward the school building behind me. Would it matter if I did? Yes. Why? Because children deserve help without becoming part of someone else's agenda. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Car headlights reflected across the wet sidewalk. Somewhere a siren echoed in the distance. Adrian looked away first. Interesting, he said quietly. What is? Nobody has ever accused me of helping people for the wrong reasons before. Maybe nobody else was willing to. His expression changed. Not offended. Thoughtful. As though my words had landed somewhere deeper than I intended. Then he nodded once. The donation has no conditions. Good. You still do not trust me. No, another pause. Would dinner change that? I laughed. Despite myself. Absolutely not. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. At least you are consistent. I shook my head and started walking away. Again. Halfway down the block, I glanced back. Adrian was still standing there beneath the fading evening light. Watching. Not angry. Not frustrated. Just standing completely still as if he had finally discovered something money could not buy. The truth is, I did not walk away because I was brave. I walked away because I was afraid. Not of Adrian Moretti himself. Of what men like him represented. 3 days passed without seeing him. 3 peaceful, ordinary days. I taught reading lessons. Graded spelling tests. Helped one of my students build a cardboard solar system that immediately fell apart 5 minutes before presentation time. Real life. Safe life. The kind of life I understood. By Friday afternoon, I almost convinced myself that Adrian had finally lost interest. Then I found the roses. They sat on my classroom desk in a crystal vase that definitely had not come from our school budget. White roses. Fresh. Perfect. Expensive. A small card rested beside them. No name. No message. Just a single line. For the children. I closed my eyes. Unbelievable, I whispered. Across the room, my friend Emily laughed. Let me guess. The mysterious billionaire again. He is not a billionaire. That is the part of the sentence you are correcting? I ignored her. But the flowers stayed in my thoughts all afternoon. Not because they impressed me. Because they reminded me how easily someone like Adrian could enter spaces that did not belong to him. That evening, after school ended, I drove 40 minutes north to visit my father. The nursing home sat beside a quiet lake surrounded by orange and red autumn trees. The air smelled like wood smoke and fallen leaves. My father sat near the window as usual, wrapped in a gray sweater, watching the water. Time had not been kind to him. His hair was completely white now. His shoulders smaller than I remembered growing up. But his smile remained the same. Claire Bear, he said as I entered. You are late. Traffic. You always blame traffic. I kissed his forehead and sat beside him. For a while we talked about ordinary things. School. Weather. Baseball. The subjects people choose when they are avoiding bigger conversations. Eventually his eyes settled on me. Something is bothering you. I looked away toward the lake. I met someone. My father raised an eyebrow. And it is complicated. The interesting ones usually are. I laughed softly. Then the laughter faded. He is not a bad person. But I do not trust where he comes from. Silence filled the room. Outside, wind moved through the trees. My father stared at the water for a long moment. You know why your mother hated organized crime? My chest tightened. We rarely talked about it anymore. Dad, do you? I swallowed. Because Grandpa got involved with the wrong people. He nodded slowly. And because those choices destroyed our family long before you were born. The room suddenly felt colder. Memories surfaced. Family arguments. Closed doors. Late-night phone calls. Adults whispering when they thought children could not hear. Some worlds take more than they give, my father said quietly. Promise me you will remember that. I promised. An hour later, I drove back toward Brooklyn beneath a darkening sky. Streetlights blurred past my windshield. My father's words echoed inside my head. Some worlds take more than they give. When I reached my apartment building, a black sedan sat parked across the street. My heart sank immediately. Adrian stepped out before I even turned off the engine. Not smiling, not confident, just standing there beneath the glow of a street lamp, waiting. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized this was no longer a coincidence. It was becoming a problem. There is a difference between persistence and patience. I did not understand it then. Neither, I think, did Adrian. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves skimming across the sidewalk. I stepped out of my car and locked the door without taking my eyes off him. He stood beneath the street lamp with his hands in the pockets of his charcoal overcoat. No bodyguards, no drivers, no crowd of people orbiting him like satellites. Just Adrian, waiting. This has to stop, I said before he could speak. His expression remained calm. Good evening to you too, Claire. Do not do that. Do what? Act like this is normal. A faint breath escaped him. Not quite a laugh. Fair enough. I started toward my building. He matched my pace from several feet away. I am not following you, he said. That is exactly what someone following me would say. I waited because I wanted to apologize. That stopped me. I turned. Apologize. The flowers. The flowers were the apology? No. He looked genuinely uncomfortable for the first time since I had met him. The flowers were a mistake. I blinked. You sent them? Yes. But they were a mistake. Also yes. Against my better judgment, I almost smiled. You are not very good at this. At what? Being normal. For a second, something softened in his eyes. Then it disappeared. I am beginning to suspect that. The autumn wind swept between the buildings. Somewhere above us, a window slammed shut. I folded my arms. What exactly do you want from me, Adrian? He looked away briefly toward the glowing skyline beyond the rooftops. Manhattan shimmered in the distance like another universe. An honest answer? That would be a nice change. His gaze returned to mine. I do not know. The answer surprised me, more than I wanted to admit. Powerful people always seemed certain. They always knew what they wanted, where they were going, how to get there. Uncertainty looked strange on him. You do not know? I repeated. No, his voice dropped slightly. I only know that every conversation we have ends with you walking away. I stared at him. That sounds like a clue. To my surprise, he laughed again. Brief. Genuine. Real. The sound made him seem younger somehow. Less intimidating. Less untouchable. And that realization bothered me more than anything else. Because it was easier to dislike a symbol than a person. Easier to reject a reputation than a man standing alone on a sidewalk admitting he did not have all the answers. You should go home, I said quietly. Probably. Neither of us moved. You are still standing here. So are you. I shook my head. Good. Night, Adrian. Then I turned and walked toward the entrance. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me one final time. Claire. I glanced back. What? He hesitated. Just for a moment. I did not donate the money because of you. I frowned. Then why did you do it? The street lamp cast long shadows across the pavement as he answered. Because after talking to you, I realized the children needed it more than I needed the credit. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I entered the building and let the door close behind me. But later that night, lying awake in the darkness of my apartment while rain tapped softly against the windows, I found myself replaying those words over and over again. And for the first time since meeting Adrian Moretti, I wondered if I might have been wrong about him. People rarely change in front of an audience. If they change at all, it happens when nobody is watching. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt strangely normal. Adrian disappeared. No flowers. No unexpected appearances. No black sedan parked outside my apartment. Days passed. Then another week. I told myself I was relieved. That was the sensible reaction. Instead, I found myself noticing his absence in small, embarrassing ways. Every time my phone buzzed. Every time I passed the corner where we had talked. Every time someone mentioned the library renovation at school. It annoyed me more than I cared to admit. On Thursday afternoon, a storm rolled through the city. Heavy clouds darkened the sky before lunch, and by dismissal the rain was falling hard enough to blur the streets beyond the classroom windows. Most parents arrived early to pick up their children. By 5 o'clock the building was nearly empty. I stayed behind grading papers while thunder echoed in the distance. When I finally left, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. My umbrella struggled against the wind as I walked toward a small neighborhood coffee shop 3 blocks away. The place was warm, crowded, and smelled like cinnamon and espresso. Exactly what I needed after a long day. I found a table near the back and ordered tea. 20 minutes later, movement outside the window caught my attention. A delivery truck had stopped beside a community center across the street. Volunteers hurried through the rain, carrying boxes inside. At first, I barely looked. Then I recognized someone. Adrian. I nearly dropped my cup. He wore a simple dark jacket instead of an expensive suit. No polished appearance. No cameras. No reporters. No publicity event. Just Adrian carrying heavy boxes through the rain alongside everyone else. I frowned. That made no sense. Curious despite myself, I watched. For nearly an hour. He never once looked toward the street. Never posed for photographs. Never acted like he was doing anyone a favor. He simply worked. An elderly woman slipped on the wet sidewalk while carrying supplies. Adrian reached her first, helping her regain balance with quiet patience before returning to work. No grand gesture. No dramatic speech. Just kindness. Real kindness. The kind nobody could profit from. Eventually, I crossed the street. The rain dampened my hair as I approached the building. Through the open doors, I saw families gathering for a free community dinner. Children laughed. Volunteers moved between folding tables. The atmosphere felt warm despite the weather outside. Adrian stood near the kitchen speaking with a young boy who could not have been older than 8. Whatever they discussed made the child grin from ear to ear. I stopped walking. Something shifted inside me. Not trust. Not yet. But confusion. Because the man standing in front of me did not match the version I had spent weeks building inside my head. As if sensing my presence, Adrian glanced toward the doorway. Surprise flashed across his face. Genuine surprise. He had not expected me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Rain tapped softly against the roof overhead. Children laughed somewhere behind him. Then Adrian smiled. Small, uncertain, almost shy. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized he might be trying just as hard to understand me as I was trying to understand him. The problem with seeing someone differently is that eventually you start looking closer. And sometimes the truth is waiting there. 2 weeks after the community center, I made a mistake. I stopped. Assuming. I started asking questions. It began innocently enough. A conversation with one of the older volunteers. Then another with a retired teacher who had worked in Brooklyn for decades. People talked about Adrian in strange ways. Nobody described him as cruel. Nobody described him as heartless. In fact, most people seemed grateful for things he had done quietly over the years. Scholarships, housing programs, community projects, medical funding. The stories did not match the rumors. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me more curious. One Saturday afternoon, I drove to visit my father again. The lake behind the nursing home reflected a pale November sky. Bare branches stretched over the water like dark fingers. Inside, my father was reading near the window when I arrived. We talked for nearly an hour before I finally mentioned Adrian's name. The effect was immediate. My father's expression changed. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to sadness. You know who he is? I asked quietly. My father closed the book in his lap. I know who his family is. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? For several seconds he stared through the window at the lake. Then he sighed. Years ago, before you were born, there was a redevelopment project near the old waterfront district. I listened carefully. Your grandfather invested everything he had into it. I remember hearing about that. Most people do not. His voice grew softer. The project collapsed. Businesses failed. Families lost money. Some people recovered. Others never did. What does that have to do with Adrian? My father hesitated. The company that benefited most afterward eventually became connected to the Moretti family. The room suddenly felt smaller. Connected how? Indirectly. He rubbed his hands together slowly. Nothing illegal was ever proven. But many people believed opportunities appeared for some families while others lost everything. My throat felt dry. Including ours. He nodded once. Silence settled between us. Outside, wind moved across the water. I thought about my grandfather. About family stories that always ended abruptly. About financial struggles nobody fully explained. About years of resentment buried beneath polite conversations. You never told me this. Because carrying old anger rarely helps anyone. I looked away, but the damage was done. The drive back to Brooklyn felt longer than usual. Streetlights blurred past my windshield while questions crowded my mind. Maybe Adrian had changed. Maybe he genuinely wanted to do good. Maybe he was nothing like the stories attached to his family name. None of that erased the past. By the time I reached home, one thought kept repeating itself. Some worlds take more than they give. 3 days later, my phone rang. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it until the call stopped. Then another came. Then a message. Are you okay? I never answered. Because for the first time since meeting him, I was not afraid of who Adrian was. I was afraid of what I might feel if I gave him another chance. Sometimes silence hurts more than an argument. Days turned into weeks. Thanksgiving decorations appeared in store windows. Christmas lights began wrapping around brownstone railings across Brooklyn. The city moved forward, but I stayed stuck in the same place. Adrian stopped calling after the 5th unanswered message. Then the messages stopped too. No explanations. No attempts to change my mind. Nothing. Part of me felt relieved. Another part noticed every absence. I hated that part. School became my refuge. Lesson plans. Parent conferences. Holiday projects. Predictable things. Things that made sense. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted again. I was leaving the school building when Principal Harris hurried toward me holding a folder. Claire, wait. I stopped. What happened? Remember the after-school arts program we almost lost funding for last year? Of course. It just received enough money to operate for the next 5 years. I froze. From who? She shook her head. Anonymous donor. My stomach sank immediately. No, what? Nothing. But it was not nothing. I already knew. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment staring out the window at the city lights. Snow flurries drifted through the darkness. My phone rested beside me on the couch. Silent. The way it had been for weeks. Finally, frustration won. I opened my laptop. 10 minutes later, I found what I was looking for. A local community foundation had published its annual report online. Buried inside dozens of pages was a list of donations. Most names were public. One contribution was listed anonymously. The amount matched exactly. Attached was a note. For the children. My chest tightened. The same words from the flowers. The same words from the library. He had done it again. And he had done it without telling me. Without expecting anything. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch. For the first time, I began wondering what those past weeks had looked like from Adrian's side. I had disappeared without explanation. Ignored every call. Every message. Every attempt to reach me. Yet somehow he kept helping the school anyway. Not because of me. Because it mattered. 3 days later, I visited the community center where I had seen him volunteering. I told myself I was only there to drop off donated books. That was a lie. The volunteer coordinator recognized me immediately. Claire. Hi. I tried to sound casual. I was wondering if Adrian still helps here. Her smile faded slightly. Not lately. Something in her tone made me pause. What happened? Nothing serious. She adjusted a stack of papers on her desk. He has been busy dealing with family issues. Family issues? His mother has been ill for months. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I thought about every conversation, every appearance, every smile, every effort he had made. And all that time he had been carrying something he never mentioned. Not once. Guilt settled heavily in my chest. Outside, snow began falling harder. As I stepped back onto the sidewalk, my phone vibrated unexpectedly. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. The message was short. Just one sentence. If you care about Adrian Moretti, you deserve to know the truth about what happened to your family years ago. The message stayed on my screen for nearly a minute before I realized I had stopped breathing. Snow drifted across the sidewalk while strangers hurried past carrying shopping bags and coffee cups, completely unaware that a single sentence had just turned my world upside down. If you care about Adrian Moretti, you deserve to know the truth about what happened to your family years ago. I read it again. Then again. My fingers felt numb against the phone. Finally, I typed a response. Who is this? The answer came almost immediately. Someone who knows the full story. A second message followed. Check the records from the waterfront redevelopment project. Start with Daniel Bennett. My grandfather. My heart pounded. Before I could type anything else, the number went inactive. Calls failed. Messages bounced back. Whoever sent it was gone. That night, I barely slept. Wind rattled the windows of my apartment, while questions spun endlessly through my head. By sunrise, I had already made up my mind. I needed answers. Real answers. Not rumors. Not assumptions. The following afternoon, I drove to the City Archives building in Lower Manhattan. The place smelled like old paper and dust. Rows of filing cabinets stretched across quiet rooms filled with researchers and historians. For 3 hours, I searched through documents connected to the redevelopment project. Property records, business filings, newspaper articles. Most of it was boring. Complicated financial details buried beneath legal language. Then I found my grandfather's name. Daniel Bennett. Investor. Partner. My pulse quickened. I kept reading. The deeper I went, the stranger the story became. According to the records, my grandfather had not lost his investment because of the Moretti family. He had withdrawn from the project months before its collapse. The documents showed signatures, dates, public notices. Everything matched. Confused, I continued searching. Another name appeared repeatedly beside my grandfather's. Victor Hale, a financial advisor, a consultant, a trusted associate. By evening, I discovered something else. Victor Hale had been investigated years later for fraud involving multiple development projects. My grandfather had never spoken about him. Neither had my father. Yet every document pointed in the same direction. The money had disappeared because of Hale's actions, not because of the Morettis. I sat frozen at the archive desk staring at the papers. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. For weeks I had convinced myself there was a connection between Adrian and my family's hardships. A reason to keep my distance. A reason to ignore everything I had seen with my own eyes. But what if I had been wrong? What if the story I inherited was incomplete? Outside, darkness had already fallen by the time I left the building. Christmas lights reflected across wet streets. Taxis moved through traffic like streams of gold and red. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. My thoughts returned to Adrian, to the unanswered messages, to the donations, to his mother's illness, to every chance I refused to give him. Guilt settled heavily in my chest. Then my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. Hello. Silence lingered for a moment. Then a familiar voice spoke softly through the line. Claire. My eyes closed immediately. Adrian. I did not expect you to answer. Snow tapped gently against the windshield. For the first time in weeks, neither of us knew what to say next. The strange thing about forgiveness is that it rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly, one truth at a time. Snow continued falling outside my windshield while I listened to Adrian's voice through the phone. For weeks I had imagined this conversation. Rehearsed arguments, questions, accusations. Yet now that it was happening, none of those words seemed important anymore. I found the records, I said softly. Silence answered me. Then, I know. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. You know? I had someone send them to you. I closed my eyes. Of course. The anonymous messages. I could not tell you directly. His voice carried a tired honesty I had never heard before. You would not have believed me. He was right. That realization hurt more than I expected. Outside, Christmas lights shimmered across the wet streets of Manhattan. The city felt distant suddenly. Small. Adrian, I said. Why did you keep trying? Another pause. Longer this time. Because you mattered. The simplicity of the answer stole my breath. No speech. No grand declaration. Just the truth. Even after I ignored you. Especially then. I laughed quietly through the tears gathering in my eyes. That makes no sense. It does to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that changed everything. My mother passed away this morning. The world stopped. Snow drifted silently across the windshield. Traffic lights changed colors in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a car horn sounded. But all I heard were those words. Adrian, she liked hearing about you. His voice cracked slightly. Just once. Even though she never met you. I pressed my hand against my mouth. Grief hung between us. Raw. Human. Real. Not the grief of a powerful man. Not the grief of a public figure. Just a son who had lost his mother. Where are you? I asked. He gave me the address. 30 minutes later, I found him sitting alone on a bench overlooking the Hudson River. Snow covered the ground in a thin white blanket. The river reflected the lights of the city like scattered stars. Adrian sat motionless, his dark coat dusted with snowflakes. He looked up as I approached. For the first time since I had met him, there was no wall between us. No reputation. No history. No expectations. Just two people standing beneath a winter sky. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We watched the river, the city, the falling snow. Eventually, Adrian broke the silence. If you still decide you want nothing to do with me, I will understand. I turned toward him. Why would you say that? A sad smile touched his face. Because caring about someone does not mean owning them. The words settled gently into the cold night air. I thought about every step of our journey, every misunderstanding, every moment I walked away, every time he chose patience instead of control, growth instead of pride. What if I do not want to walk away anymore? I asked. His eyes met mine. Hope appeared there so suddenly it almost hurt to see. Neither of us smiled right away. We simply sat together while snow fell around us and the river carried reflections of light into the darkness. And in that quiet moment, I finally understood something. He had spent his entire life learning how to rule a city. But love was the one thing that taught him how to become human.